But we are pleased to welcome Mr. Alan Orlob, Vice President of Corporate Security and Loss Prevention for Marriott International, who is our speaker this morning. We'll begin in just a moment. Let me just briefly run through a couple of announcements that you may be interested in. We have a conference tomorrow afternoon here in 238, Tigers on the Peninsula, the Koreas in 2006, which the Kennedy Center is co-sponsoring along with the Korean Economic Institute of Washington, D.C. That begins at 1 o'clock tomorrow and will run until about 5 p.m. Highlights will include presentations by L. Gordon Flake of the Mansfield Foundation, who is a Kennedy Center graduate alum and an expert on North Korea. Mark Peterson, section head for Korean Studies here at BYU. Scott Rembrandt, who's the Director of Academic Affairs and Outreach for the Korean Economic Institute. Kirk Phillips, Associate Professor of Economics at BYU. Lee Kyung-yul from the Embassy of the Republic of Korea. And an opportunity to discuss issues related to the geopolitical and the economic opportunities around North and South Korea. At 4:30, there will be a Taste of Korea. So the idea being that if you've never tried Korean food, this is your chance to do it with training wheels. There'll be a sampling of food provided courtesy of our friends at Touch of Seoul here in Provo. And then tomorrow night at 5:30, we'll be screening Seoul Train, which I think most Korean experts agree is a pretty bad title, S-E-O-U-L. But it's quite a gripping and fairly compelling documentary about the plight of North Koreans trying to reach the South, and has some very TAFE footage that will give you a very real sense of the challenges that people face in this part of the world. So that's tomorrow, starting at 1 p.m. here in the Kennedy Center conference room. We're wrapping up our academic conference call series with the Council on Foreign Relations on Friday. I think it's a great way to wrap it up with Richard Haas, President of the Council on Foreign Relations. The teleconference will be held in 257, the little small room across from here, at 10 a.m. They're at noon on Eastern Time, but we'd encourage anyone interested to sit in. Also, you can contact Sigma Iota Rho, our honor society, and they have a link with some detailed information, some articles written by Dr. Haas, and some background information that might be useful. There are about 25 universities across the country that participate in these conference calls, and while conference calls are not necessarily the most exciting visually, the substance of what's discussed has been very, very high quality, and I think it's worth considering. Then on Monday, you'll notice that we are hosting our 15th Annual International Society Conference. The International Society is a group of LDS professionals and friends of Latter-day Saints who are interested in international activities. It's usually a very broad conference and an opportunity to get to know people who work in business, government, education, media, health, nonprofit sectors, education, and so forth. This year's topic will be International Challenges Facing the LDS Church, and there will be, just refer you to our website for the detailed schedule. Meetings will be held in the Harold B. Lee Library Auditorium, and there will be a luncheon that you need to register for in advance if you're interested in participating. But always a good time. Most of the members of the International Society don't live in Utah, and so for the over 3,000 members, they won't be attending the conference, but this provides a nice focal point for those who are in the state at this time and can get together and do a little networking and renew old acquaintances. And for your interest, the International Society database, which is free to join, you can get access to all of those LDS professionals who have essentially volunteered themselves to be a resource for career counseling or assistance in seeking internships. There's a nice little subgroup that's developed of LDS national security professionals that Professor Valerie Hudson and Dr. Carrie Karchner of the State Department have facilitated. Other subgroups are sort of spontaneously forming, but it's a great opportunity, particularly for students, if you're interested in those areas, or to just to meet other professionals, many of whom have no connections to BYU whatsoever, but who are very active in their professional careers and are willing to provide service to students and others. We'd like to begin today. If I'm thinking there, one more announcement. Oh yes, I'm sorry. the BYU Foreign Service Student Organization has started their Foreign Service Exam Prep course, which is free to all interested students. It's held every Thursday at 11 a.m., and I believe they're being held in, let me see if I can tell you, 117 HRCB, so downstairs. For those of you who are familiar with the Foreign Service exam, it's a tough written exam. You can take it any number of times. We had over 365 students last year at BYU take the exam. We had 121 students pass. It's one of the higher pass rates in the country. I think we had 21 students who passed the orals and were put on the list to possibly get an offer. So BYU FSSO exists to kind of promote that career path and help students prepare. So if you're interested in that, that's tomorrow at 11 a.m. in 117 HRCB. That's it. Thanks for your patience. I remind you that this and all the other lectures here in the Kennedy Center are video recorded and podcast on iTunes. So if we do have time for questions, please wait until you get the wireless mic so we'll get a good recording for those in watching or listening to the lecture later. We'd like to begin with an opening prayer. We've asked Heidi McLaren, who's an international relations major from West Row, England, to offer our prayer, after which I will introduce Mr. Orlob.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we are grateful to be here today. We are grateful for the opportunity that we have to be here at this university that gives us so many opportunities for distinguished and knowledgeable speakers. We ask that we can take the knowledge that we have to become more aware of the world around us, and that we can try to improve it and make it a better place. And we ask Thee to please bless us today, that we may listen and get what we need to from this lecture. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Well, it's my great honor to welcome to campus Mr. Alan Orlob, as I mentioned, Vice President of Corporate Security and Loss Prevention for Marriott International Lodging. Mr. Orlob oversees all international security operations and Marriott's crisis management program. Prior to working for Marriott, he was the Corporate Security Director for Al-Ghanim International, a private investment holding and management company managing a close protection detail, and had also been the Director of Public Safety at Snowbird, Utah. For 24 years, he's also served both active duty and reserve with the U.S. Army Special Forces. He is an alumni member of the United States State Department Overseas Security Advisory Council, or OSAC, a security advisor to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank, and chairs the Global Security Council for the International Hotel and Restaurant Association. Orlob has served as consultant with the U.S. State Department's Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program on hotel security and was a stakeholder for a RAND initiative on counter-surveillance. He's a member of the Conference Board Council of Security Executives, a member of the International Security Management Association, ASIS, and a member of the American Society for Industrial Security International. Mr. Orlob will be speaking today on Marriott's International's approach to mitigating the terrorist threat. Many of you have participated in study abroad or internship or field study programs abroad. I think we all have some small sense of the challenges facing students, facing travelers overseas, and the changes since 9/11 in the environment. We're particularly grateful for Mr. Orlob that he would take time out of his schedule to come down and speak with us today about this topic. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Alan Orlob.
Thanks, Corey. It's a pleasure to be here today. I was telling Landis, the last group I spoke to, I spent 30 hours flying, arrived in Washington Dulles Airport at 7 in the morning to speak at 8:30. So this one I drove over from Park City. It was a little bit easier. So thanks for inviting me. This whole aspect that we've and phrase that we've heard the last few years of soft targets. I can remember probably before September 11th, for those people who are not in the terrorism field, if you mention soft targets, nobody would know what you're talking about. But now it seems that there's a lot of focus on soft targets, especially as it relates to terrorism. In about 1998, the U.S. Started putting much more money into protecting official facilities overseas. So as they did that, the terrorists started shifting, and their focus started shifting to targets that were much easier to penetrate. And thus they moved to the soft targets. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Hotels are particularly susceptible, and I'll talk about some of the reasons why that's so. This is Marriott's portfolio. Some of you probably recognize some of these brands, and some of the brands you may not recognize. We have a higher tier brand called JW Marriott Hotels. Marriott also owns Ritz-Carlton Hotels. We also have a new product that we've been rolling out called Bulgari Hotels, which is a very luxury tier hotel. It's designed by the famous Italian designer Bulgari. We have a hotel in Milan and a second one that just opened in Bali. So you can see that we operate worldwide about 2,800 hotels. I was at a State Department briefing last November when I was pulled out of the meeting and informed that there had been a series of attacks against hotels in Amman, Jordan. And in this case, they had suicide bombers that went into the Hyatt, the Days Inn, and the Radisson hotels in Amman, and you may have heard about that. We have a hotel in Amman too, and I was able to access the target list afterwards, and I saw that our hotel was noticeably absent from that target list, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and show you why I think our hotel was absent. And when we take a look at some of the recent history of hotels, in 2001, armed gunmen took hostages in the Swiss hotel in Istanbul and took over the hotel. 2002, there was an attack outside the Sheraton Karachi Hotel. 2003 was our bombing in Jakarta. 2004, the Taba Hilton, where they drove a vehicle into the lobby of the hotel. 2005, the recent bombings in Sharm el-Sheikh, where they drove a vehicle again into the lobby of the Ghazala Gardens Hotel in Sharm el-Sheikh. And certainly hotels seem to be a focus. Why? First of all, they're icons of tourism. If they hit a hotel, it's certainly going to affect the government. It's going to affect their economy. In many cases, hotels employ minimal security. They have a lot of high-profile guests that staying at hotels, and in many cases, the guests themselves are targeted. Hotels are hospitality-oriented. I talk about this a lot to different organizations, especially different hotel companies. And I tell them that a hotel general manager is focused on two things, hospitality and profit. And when we start putting security in, that's in direct opposition to what he's always practiced. Public accessibility. It's easy to get into a hotel. They're open 24 hours a day. And a lot of times they're difficult to protect because hotels are located in areas that many times we can't get any setback. They're located close to the road. So these are probably some pretty good reasons why hotels are targeted. And I'm going to talk to you today about what we can do to mitigate the threat of an attack. You know, I talk a lot. I belong to a lot of different organizations, and I sit in meetings and we talk about soft targets and how they're targeted. And some of my colleagues in the security field kind of wring their hands and say, you know, we're a soft target. We need to get the governments to protect us. There's nothing we can do. And I disagree with that. I think there are a lot of things we can do, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. What have we developed within Marriott? Well, first of all, a process to analyze risk. We need to, before we can start putting in mitigation measures, we need to understand what the risk is. And now we need to, once we analyze the risk, we need to know where to allocate the resources. And then we have to put together some measures to mitigate the occurrence of a crisis. And certainly something that a lot of people miss is if a crisis happens, you have to have a response plan in place. Because so many times we get a crisis and everybody spends so much time dealing with how to prevent the crisis that if it happens, they're caught flat-footed. This is kind of an interesting slide. This shows how companies fare after a crisis. And it shows that after the first 10 days of any major crisis, a company, whether they handle it well or whether they handle it poorly, their shareholder value will decrease by about 10%. But it also shows that at the end of a one-year period, the companies who handle the crisis well, at the end of a year, their shareholder value actually increases by 7%, where the companies who don't handle a crisis well, their shareholder value decreases by 15%. I gave a presentation to Marriott's board of directors some months ago with Bill Marriott and the board, and this is a great slide to show them to understand why I need more money. So I think they get it. Well, let me talk a little bit about the elements of a crisis management program. And these are all the things that we've put together within Marriott. We've developed a crisis management plan at headquarters. Every hotel is tasked with developing their own local plans. We have a crisis management team. It's headed up by the president of lodging, so it gets good top-down focus. We do intelligence gathering. And it's interesting because a few years ago, when I did this presentation, I would talk about information gathering. I was afraid to use the word intelligence. But now I think people are so used to using the word and so used to understanding it that I feel comfortable using it now within groups. We do information dissemination. Once we get this intelligence information in, we go through it and look at it and decide what needs to be pushed out to protect our people. So we disseminate that information. We do risk assessments continually on our hotels, and then we set what we call our threat conditions. And these threat conditions are really the pillar of our program, and I'll talk to you a little bit more in depth. We do a lot of training, and again, we do a lot of recovery and business continuity. Crisis management team, I mentioned the person who heads it up is a guy by the name of Ed Fuller. Ed is the president of Marriott Lodging. So again, it's got very good top-down focus, and he's the guy that drives this. Without his focus on this, I would have a difficult time. But you can see, the nice thing about working in a large company like Marriott is we can bring a lot of resources to bear. We have people from legal, finance, HR, risk management, PR, logistics. We have all these people that come on anytime we have a crisis. When I put this thing together, I was asked about, 12 or 13 years ago to put together a crisis plan for the company. And I had spent some time in the military. And I envisioned that's how it would be. We used to run these Cobra Gold exercises in Thailand. And we would be sitting in there in what we called a JSOTF, a Joint Special Operations Task Force. And we'd sit in a big room, and we would have all these charts on the wall, and we'd have all these clocks, and we would be operating all these teams out in the field. And I thought that's how it would be when we did that. And that's kind of how we put our crisis room together. We've got these, TVs in there, and we've got charts, and we've got clocks, and all those things that we got for it. But in reality, it never works that way. Because every time we have a crisis, we have so many people traveling throughout the world that it's difficult to do it. I can remember in July I was in Bangkok. I was actually on vacation, and I was in our hotel running on the treadmill. And I'm watching CNN as I'm on the treadmill, and I see that they're announcing that they thought there's been some kind of an electrical explosion in the London Underground system. And so I kept running and watching this. My ears perked up a little bit. And the next thing, a few minutes later, they come on and they said that they thought two trains had collided in the underground system in London. And now my ears are really kind of perking up here, and I'm wondering what's going on. And a few minutes later, they said there's been 3 different explosions in 3 different parts of the underground. And at that time, I thought to myself, okay, this is terrorism. So I jumped off the treadmill and ran up to my room, activated our crisis team. We have, in London itself, we have about 12 Marriott hotels. So we put all our hotels up at what we call threat condition red and put our all our activities into play. And this is probably typical of how it is every time we have a crisis. I can never really think of one where I've been back in the office, sitting ready to go into this crisis room. So that's the practical application. We do a lot of training. We do training for our crisis team, tabletop exercise. We train all our general managers. My regional directors have had what I think is some of the best training in the world. We brought in certainly some of the best speakers in the world on terrorism to talk to them. And then we do a lot of training for the hotel people. And actually, we just put together a crisis training program for our hotel people that we're rolling out. So, I've tried to study what happens during a crisis and how do companies do well and why do some other companies do so poorly. And a lot of that is because of the leadership. And I really am a firm believer that training is the key, that if you can train and train and train, when a crisis happens, you just react to it. You've been through it before, you react to it. Maybe it's a little bit different, but you've seen it before, so there isn't the mass confusion. And again, I'm just a strong believer in training. How do we do intelligence gathering? A lot of official sources. We have very close ties with the State Department. I spent 6 years on the OSAC Council in Washington, and I'm still what they call an alumni member. I don't know what that means. I do just as much work. But we have very, very close ties with them. If you aren't familiar with OSAC, you might go onto their website and take a look at it because they have a lot of great information. They also have risk analysts where we can pick up the phone anytime and call their risk analysts and talk to them if we've got a specific situation going on. As I travel around the world, I always make it a point to stop and go to the embassy. Every embassy has what they call an RSO, or regional security officer at the embassy, and they're a wealth of information. We also use some contract sources. We use a company in Washington called TransSecure. We use another company in Potomac, Maryland called iJet. We use a company called Control Risk Group, which is based in London, and we use Hill & Associates based in Hong Kong. And that really gives us a good overview of what's going on around the world, I think. And I have an analyst back in Washington, and every morning that's his job. He pulls this information, and we look at it, and we see where the threat is around the world. And then based upon that information, we set threat conditions at our hotels. We have a color-coded threat condition system. So we put the hotels at blue, which is elevated, but it's very low impact to the guest. Then we have another threat condition called yellow, and then we get up to red, and I'll take you through that a little bit. And by the way, we put this color-coded system in about 12 years ago, so quite a bit before Homeland Security did, and ours actually makes sense too. So actually, I was saying this last week, and this woman came up to me and handed me her card. She was with Homeland Security. So I said, gee, hope I didn't offend you, but I think she understood. We also watch these travel warnings that the State Department puts out very, very closely. And what we watch is the wording on these travel warnings, because a lot of people see the travel warnings and they say, gee, this travel warning is exactly the same as they put out 6 months ago. But actually, when we look very closely at the wording, we see that the wording changes very subtly sometimes. And in this case, we saw it was targeted against Western hotels and seeking softer targets. So certainly when we saw that, when we saw Western hotels on there, we knew that they had received some information and knew that Western hotels were being targeted. So again, we raised our threat level at those hotels. I'll take you through these threat conditions. Actually, under threat condition blue, we have about 40 procedures that the hotels are required to follow. But this is just about 5 to give you a little bit of a flavor. we have a security officer at the front entrance at all times. And I had a hotel in London, and we audit these hotels. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the auditor went there, and no security officer was at the front entrance. And I talked to the general manager, and he said, "Oh, we have our concierge at the front entrance, and we figure, as long as someone's there, it's okay." And I said, "No, not at all. It has to be a dedicated security officer, and he has to be visible as a security officer. And the reason for that is if somebody's conducting surveillance against the hotel, he'll see a security officer there. And that's why it needs to be a dedicated security officer. And the other reason is we want that person trained in surveillance detection. So again, if somebody is conducting surveillance, he's going to pick it up. A concierge won't pick that up." Hourly security patrols of the interior of the hotel, and it all has to be documented. And then we get to threat condition yellow, and it's everything under blue, only now we don't allow storage of luggage unless it's inspected. We start inventorying vehicles. We start restricting parking close to the hotels. We start restricting photo taking. We're watching for people who are taking photos of the hotel, whether on the outside or the inside. We also require the hotels every day to download their list of guests and their associates and send it to a central repository in Washington. So if something happens at that hotel, I can reach in and I know all the guests staying at the hotel. You might have seen, I don't know if you saw it or not, about a month ago there was a bombing in Karachi. And it was actually targeted towards a diplomat's vehicle, but it was in the back of our hotel. Our hotel is right next to the U.S. consulate in Karachi. So it blew out the back windows of the hotel. And, I start getting the phone call. I was actually at home in Park City, just finished dinner, had some friends in skiing, and I got the phone call. It was good because it was time to clean up the dishes, and I told them, "Sorry, guys, I got to go to work." So it got me out of that. But, I got on the phone, and again, even though none of our guests were injured or anything, I could pull that guest list out, and I could see everybody staying in the hotel at the time. So when the phone calls start coming in, and people say, "Gee, I think my wife is staying at your hotel," or "I'm from ABC Company, and we think some of our people were staying at your hotel," we can pull that list up. We've got it all. And then we get to threat condition red. We've got about, around the world right now, we have about 22 countries where we have our hotels at threat condition red. And once we get up to threat condition red, we require metal detector screening of anybody coming into the hotel. And that's not just guests, it's also our employees. We start checking guest luggage. It has to be checked either manually or with an explosive vapor detector. And most of our hotels, we have these explosive vapor detectors positioned. I just ordered 8 additional vapor detectors, these EVDs, so that if we have a problem, we can take them and get it to the hotel right away. We start inspecting vehicles, and any vehicle that's coming close to the building has to be stopped and inspected. Well, when we started doing this about, I guess about 4 years ago, we started raising this a bit. And I went to a hotel in Europe, and it was a new Marriott hotel, and it was a new general manager. And I walked in the lobby, and he said, let's sit down and chat a little bit. And we sat there, and I looked around, and I said, "Let's see, you're at threat condition blue. You're required to have a security officer in the lobby. Where is the person?" And he pointed to the front desk, and he said, "Oh, the people there watch the lobby." And I said, No, you don't understand. This has to be a dedicated security officer in the lobby. And he said, "Well, that's going to cost me too much money." And I said, "It doesn't matter what it costs. This is the requirement under our standard." And he said, "Well, I'm not going to do it." And I said, "Well, okay." I said, "When I leave here, I'm going to go talk to your boss. And if I don't get satisfaction from him, I'm going to talk to his boss. And if I don't get satisfaction from him, I'm going to talk to his boss, which is also my boss. But we're going to make this happen." So he said, do what you need to do. So I said, okay. So I left, and I didn't talk to his bosses. I just went right to my boss. And I said, we've got a problem here. And so he says, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to audit the hotels. So we hired an outside company. Actually, we used Control Risk Group out of London. And they go around now and audit our hotels twice a year unannounced. So they showed up at this hotel. And you know what happens is they do the first hotel, maybe a hotel in Germany, and the general manager gets on the phone and calls all his friends. Oh, the auditor was here. So they all raise up the security. So, and that's what this guy did. So, they showed up at his hotel and he passed the audit. He had everything in place like he was supposed to. So I had the auditors come back a week later and hit him again, and he failed. So he got a written warning that went in his file. But you know what? I'm not one of his favorite people anymore. As a matter of fact, when I stay at that hotel, I get a pretty bad room. But it doesn't matter. He got the message, and so did the other general managers as well. And now, we found out that because of that, now we do the audits on a random basis, so they never know when the auditor is going to show up. But it's been very, very effective. Well, let me talk to you about a bombing that happened at our hotel in Jakarta, August 5th, 2003. This is, if you've ever been to Jakarta, this is called the Megakunian District. And our hotel is actually the centermost building here. And the area is pretty much surrounded by embassies and office buildings. It's not in the central business district in Jakarta. And this is a layout of the hotel. So you have the main road and going here, and they drive on the left side here. The cars would pull up to the front entrance here, drop off their guests, and then exit out. This restaurant is called the Salendra Restaurant, very popular restaurant in Jakarta, seats about 300 people, has about 4 different food stations, so if you want Indian food, you can go over here. If you want Western food, you can go over here. If you want Indonesian food, you can go over here. Very, very popular. At the time of the bombing, it was about 12:40 in the afternoon, and the restaurant was packed. We had a suicide bomber in a 1986 Toyota Kijang. It's a Toyota Kijang looks a little bit like an SUV. They're ubiquitous in Jakarta. It seems like about every third car is a Toyota Kijang. So he came in that day, 28 years old, Jamaah Islamiyah, and made a left-hand turn into the driveway. And as you can see, he came up a small incline there. At that time, we had our hotel at threat condition red. The hotel opened on September 18th, 2001. And we had been watching a terrorist group in Indonesia called Laskar Jihad. And Laskar Jihad made the threat that if the U.S. Went into Afghanistan, that Laskar Jihad was going to go to Western hotels and pull out Westerners. So we opened the hotel again at threat condition red. So everything was going on. At that time, I was on the OSAC Council. I was on the Country Council Support Committee. I had 6 countries assigned to me. Indonesia was one of the countries. The RSO at that time was Jake Woolman. I knew Jake very well. I'd been over there several times, and we knew the security situation in Indonesia. So, again, we had the hotel operating at threat condition red, 3 security officers there doing full-blown vehicle inspections. The vehicle made the turn, came up the incline, and as he approached the incline and the 3 security officers, the vehicle stalled, and the 3 security officers then approached him. At that time, he detonated the vehicle. And I'm going to pause out of this for just a minute. And if you'll allow me, I'm going to, I've got the actual video taken from our CCTVs at the hotel of the bombing itself. So what we're seeing here is this is a video frame taken at 12:18. And so what's going on here is, again, the cars would drive up here into the driveway, drop their people off, and you can see we've got a walk-through metal detector here. Everybody had to go through the walk-through metal detector. We've got a security officer here watching the driveway. And this is about half an hour before the bombing. And this is what it looked like about 10 seconds before the bombing. Fortunately, the driveway was clear. And, you know, when I looked at this later, I thought, you know, we've got this young security officer here. This is a security officer here that's doing the metal detector screening, and this is a doorman. Most of the time, you know, if nobody was around, this guy's probably going to walk over here and chat with his friends. You know, that's just what people do. But instead, his focus is right down the driveway, right where it should be. You know, and I thought about this later. I thought, what's he looking at? And what he was looking at is his three friends, his three colleagues, had stopped the vehicle. So he's focusing in on that vehicle. And I'll go ahead and roll the video. And you saw the blast, and what's going on here now is it's knocked down an awning, and it's all filled with smoke. And you'll see in just a minute here people coming through the smoke haze running out of the hotel. We would have preferred that we took them out the back of the hotel, but in this type of a situation, people are going to go where they want to go. Because the front, we still had a lot of falling glass and a lot of debris coming down. You know, we talk a lot about these bombings and what it does, but until you actually see this happen, it really wakes you up. You can see the people now kind of running through the smoke there.
Is that from the restaurant or from the hotel?
It's actually from the restaurant. Yeah, they were all coming out of it. And I'll show you another clip here that's actually... This is the front lobby, and again, this is 10 seconds before the bombing. So the people would come into the lobby, the front doors are right here, and they would come in here, and the restaurant is around this corner here. And I'll roll that video. So it's a pretty compelling reason to have mitigation measures in place. There were 12 people that died. One was a guest. He was seated in the restaurant. He was a Dutch banker. His family had already gone back to Amsterdam. He was supposed to leave the next day. The others were all taxi drivers and security officers. But as you can see, if we didn't have those mitigation measures in place, if we didn't have those security officers stopping the vehicles, we think he probably would have driven into the lobby of the hotel, because that's been their pattern. And you can see the people, again, coming out of the restaurant. A lot of them are being carried. So I'll jump now back to the presentation. And I've never figured out how to jump right back to the slide I was on, so bear with me a second here. Okay, so that's where the vehicle blew up. These boards are here. As you can see, He was actually alongside a sidewalk there. But even if they had let him up another 50 feet, he would have been directly alongside the restaurant. So they stopped what could have been a real catastrophe. I did this presentation after the bombing. It was November of that year at the OSAC annual briefing. And this is to about 800 security professionals from all over the world. And afterwards, a guy by the name of Mike Farmer came up to me, and Mike's a friend of mine. He's the corporate security director for ExxonMobil. And Mike came up and he said, when this bombing happened in Jakarta, he said, my boss called me on the phone and said that was a security failure on your part to have people in that hotel with the threat. He said, but my boss attended this briefing with me, and he said after the briefing, my boss leaned over and said, I was wrong. This was a security success because of the level of security they had in the hotel. So that's what we key on. We put a lot of security into these hotels. This is what the vehicle looked like. Again, 1986 Toyota Kijang. Filled in the back with these jerry cans filled with kerosene. And I was in Singapore last week. I met with a guy by the name of Rohan Gunaratna. And Rohan is one of the world's foremost experts on Jamaat Islamiyah. And he runs a center in Singapore, and it's an academic center, and they look at this information. And Rohan gave me a briefing on information they had received about this bombing. And basically he said they used a combination of high explosive and low explosive. The high explosive was RDX TNT. The low explosive was potassium chloride, aluminum. So that's what it was. The bomb maker actually was killed about, I guess it was about 6 months ago in Indonesia. However, his accomplice is still running around, so they're looking for him still. This is the photo that was in the newspapers that went around the world. This was the front page of the New York Times, front page of San Francisco Chronicle. I actually jumped on a plane and flew to Jakarta, and I picked a couple of copies of these up as I left there. Well, when this thing happened, I was home in Park City. The call came in at about 30 minutes past midnight for me. We have a crisis hotline. So if we have a crisis anywhere in the world, the hotels are instructed to call this hotline and report it. So I got a call from our hotline, and they told me what had happened. Excuse me. And at that time, I picked up the phone and called my boss and talked to him. My boss has an office in Washington, as do I, at Marriott headquarters. He lives in Laguna Niguel, California. So, there's a little bit of a pattern here. We don't like to live in Washington. I live in Park City. He lives in Laguna Niguel, but we both have offices there. So at that time, we convened our crisis team, and we had everybody on the phone within about 30 minutes. And the first thing we did is establish communications with the hotel. Under our procedures, in my role as the crisis coordinator, I'm the only one allowed to talk to the hotel. And the reason for that is when you have a crisis like this general manager is busy, and he doesn't have time to be fielding calls from the vice president of human resources and the vice president of public relations and all these other people who want to talk to him. So those questions are all funneled through me, and then I push the questions out to him. We accessed this guest list that I referred to earlier, so we had a copy of everybody staying in the hotel. We had to account for the guests and associates, and that was kind of interesting because, remember, this happened mid-afternoon in Jakarta. People were outside on business appointments, so when it happened, a lot of them heard about it. They went directly to the airport, and they left the country, and we had no idea where they were. So it took us a little while to account for some of these people. We notified FEI. FEI is a company that a lot of the major airlines use for a disaster, and you see it pop up on CNN. If you have relatives involved in this, call this number. We use them as well. So, excuse me, at that time we activated FEI. One of the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda is they do simultaneous attacks. We saw that certainly in Madrid. We saw it in London. We saw it in the U.S. So when this happened, we put all our hotels in Asia at threat condition red. We put all our hotels throughout the world up one level so that everybody was at a higher alert state. We had to secure housing. Suddenly we've lost a hotel. But fortunately, we had already worked out an agreement with a local hotel company, so we put all our guests in that hotel. Notified insurance, we had them coming in from Singapore. We had to establish associate counseling, which sounds pretty easy. We'll just bring in some of these trained psychologists that do this in the U.S., fly them over to Jakarta, and they will sit with our employees, our associates, and take them through this counseling procedure. But in fact, that doesn't work because you've got to have someone who speaks Bahasa, the local language, and you've got to have somebody who understands the local culture. And so we had to find local people, local psychologists in Indonesia to do this. Well, one of the real challenges we had is with the employees. They said, here I am. I've just lost my livelihood. What am I going to do? How am I going to feed my family? The owner of the hotel made a commitment. He said, we'll get this hotel back and operating in 30 days. So we missed it a little bit. We opened September 8th. But this is what the hotel looks like now. You can see it now. This used to be the driveway up, and now it's all barricaded off. Nobody can get close to the hotel. And let me back up that slide a little bit. Glass protection. A year after this bombing happened, there was a bombing at the Australian embassy in Indonesia, and I flew over there to see what had happened. And when I looked at the Australian embassy, I saw that all their windows were intact. But I looked to the office buildings to the left and right of me, and I saw that all their windows were blown out. And I'm just a huge believer in glass protection. And that's what we've got at this hotel. We've got a combination of laminated glass and mylar film on the glass to hold the glass together in the event of a blast. And you can see what's going on here is vehicles who want to go into the hotel have to go through this area to be inspected. Vehicles continuing on cannot get close to the hotel. We've got jersey barriers all along here. And again, when you look at this vehicle checkpoint, we've got 8 security officers doing inspections here. We've got CCTV up here. We've got an armed policeman here with an automatic weapon. And when we did this, I told him, this has to be effective, but it also has to be efficient. If you've ever tried to go through Washington Dulles Airport on a Friday afternoon and stood in line going through TSA for an hour and a half, you'll understand what I'm talking about. I said, we can't do this. We have to have enough people laid on so that these vehicles don't back up on us. So that's what we've done. We've got, as I said, 8 security officers there. Metal detector screening. Anybody coming close to the hotel has to go through this metal detector. Luggage inspections. All luggage is checked with an explosive vapor detector. We have 4 of them at that hotel. And again, we've got a police officer here with an automatic weapon. And again, I'm a big believer in sniffer dogs. But what you're seeing here is a golden retriever. I've got a golden retriever. And for any of you who've got dogs, they sleep all the time. So if you think you can use a dog for 8 hours, you can't. What we've got is a procedure there where they can bring vehicles in 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, and that's it, because that's about the maximum these dogs can work. So we have to know what the vehicle is that's coming in to make the delivery, who the driver is, and when they bring it in, it's inspected by a sniffer dog. And the sniffer dogs actually are better than the EVDs. They're really good. Well, my boss came to me a couple of years ago. He said, is there a threat condition red that's redder than red? because we were getting a lot of threats. And I said, you know what I'd like to do is put in a surveillance detection program. And as it was mentioned, I spent about a year with RAND looking at surveillance detection. And so that's what we've done in a lot of our hotels operating at threat condition red. Because we know when these guys do an attack, they do target surveillance first. And we want to stop them in that surveillance process. So what we've done is put in surveillance detection teams in our hotels. And we make sure that they understand this attack cycle. We train all the front of the house associates, and we have covert surveillance detection teams in place. These are all the enhancements we do at a hotel at threat condition red. And you can see there's a lot going on there, and it's a lot of money to spend. And sometimes I get asked, is it too much? But, you know, I guess we answer back, why do we do it? First of all, we want to protect the guests and associates. We want to protect the asset building, protect the local business. After these bombings in Amman, I did a couple of interviews, and I told the people that, you know, these bombs didn't just affect the Hyatt and the Radisson and the Days Inn in Amman. They affect the industry and they affect the country. 2 weeks ago, I was in Bali working with the Bali Hotel Association. After the second round of Bali bombings, their occupancies in their hotels are running about 40%. And so we've been working with them to try to help them understand what security should be in a hotel and how to get customers back. Protect the brand. We want to make sure that Marriott doesn't become a target. We're certainly an icon just because of our name. So we want to make sure that the brand is protected. And we certainly want to make sure that we have investor confidence. If people want to open a Marriott hotel somewhere around in the world, again, we want them to have confidence that we have security systems in place. And as I showed you in one of the first slides, shareholder value. And that's what Bill Marriott's worried about is our stock, and make sure that we protect our shareholder value. So I've got about 5 minutes, it looks like. If there are some questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
What do you do for the security of your actual security? For your security agents, like for instance in Jakarta, you had them where there were 8 outside. What do you do for their protection? I mean, for their security? Are they just, that's their job, or?
That's their job, yeah. It's kind of like the military in Baghdad. I mean, you can give them, Humvees, and you can give them body armor, but if somebody wants to blow them up, that's their job. Want a job?
You talked about the expense of creating these really complex security profiles and programs. However, has the business increased because people realize the efforts that you've been making?
Yeah, absolutely.
Security?
There's a huge return on investment. Believe me, if you aren't doing this, you're not going to have the business. You're going to lose the business. And we've seen that, especially in these high-risk environments. Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Oman, the Philippines, Indonesia. If you're not doing this, you're going to lose the business. And that's what we've been talking about to the Bali Hotel Association. If those people don't do it, they aren't going to get the business. And basically, that's what it amounts to. So there's a huge return on investment.
Is the cycle of the things that you do, is that consistent across the world? Because I know some countries have different work ethics.
For the most part, we've run into some challenges. We had a challenge actually in Amman, where in Amman they wouldn't let us use metal detectors. So when that bombing happened, we had our hotel at threat condition red. We had everything going on. We had the security officer at the entrance. We were doing vehicle inspections, but the government at that time would not let us do metal detector screening. However, everything else was going on there. None of the other hotels were doing anything. And I talked to the RSO afterwards, and he said, he felt that was the reason we were not on the target list, is because of all that was going on. But right after that, within 24 hours, they had metal detectors at every 4- and 5-star hotel in Amman. I was over there with the State Department a month after the bombings, working with their anti-terrorism assistance program, and we met with the government, both with their intelligence services and also their security services, and we've had the same thing in Doha, for instance. We had doing doing vehicle inspections, and we had one of the princes came in, and they wanted to inspect his car, and the next thing we knew, he's hauling our security officers off to jail. So, occasionally we get some challenges with the local governments, but most of the time now they understand, and they've come around. We had a problem in Saudi Arabia for years, and Saudis come around. Yeah. Any other questions?
With putting all that security, does it increase the cost for the residents or those visitors to the hotel, stay in the hotel?
No, it hasn't. We haven't tried to pass on the cost. We did have a Courtyard franchise hotel in Amsterdam that wanted to charge a surcharge for security, but we haven't gotten to that point. We just feel it's part of doing business. One last question.
Is this at all your hotels or only the high-end hotels?
High-end, you mean the high risk or?
No, the 5-star, like the JW Marriotts, or is it at all the Marriott hotels?
Well, we're pretty much a high-end company. No, it's actually required for all products. For instance, in Dubai, we have a JW Marriott, we have a Renaissance Hotel, we have a Ritz-Carlton Hotel, we have what we call MEA, Marriott Executive Apartments, we have a Courtyard Hotel. They're all required to do it across the board. Even if we have a sales office, we have some of these worldwide sales offices. If we have a sales office there, they're required to do it. We're opening a new sales office in Kuala Lumpur next month. I've got my regional director going over to KL to assess the security to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And KL's at threat condition yellow.
Alan, what is the percentage of security officers that are contracted out?
For the most part, we don't like to contract, but a lot of times the people who are doing the perimeter security, we use contract. The people who are doing the interior security, we use proprietary. So we'd rather use our own people, quite frankly. Any other questions? Well, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.